The moment the Alpha King's boots stopped outside her door, her world changed forever. Nobody ever paid attention to Nadia. That was not an accident. She had spent years making sure of it. She kept her head down, her voice low, and her steps quiet. She did her work before sunrise and disappeared before anyone could notice her. She lived at the very end of the East Wing, the long, dim corridor that nobody used unless they absolutely had to. Her room was small, her bed was narrow. Her one window faced a wall. And that was fine. That was safe. Nadia had been living inside this compound since she was 9 years old. That was the year her parents disappeared. She was told they were let go from the pack, which was the polite way of saying they were removed, quietly, without explanation, and she was never told why. Elder Marin, a sharp older woman who ran the community kitchen, had taken her in. Not out of warmth exactly, but out of duty. And Nadia had been grateful for that. She still was. She had learned the rules early. Don't make eye contact with ranked members. Don't speak unless asked. Don't linger anywhere that matters. And most importantly, never, ever attract the attention of the Alpha King. She had followed every single one of those rules for 15 years. And then, on a cold Tuesday night in October, something happened that she could not have prepared for. She was already asleep when it happened. She didn't hear the footsteps at first. They were too measured, too quiet for that. But sometime around midnight, she woke up with a strange feeling. Like something in the air had shifted. She lay still under her blanket, listening. The corridor outside was silent, and then she heard it. The slow, heavy sound of boots on the stone floor. They were getting closer. She told herself it was nothing. The compound had guards. Guards walked corridors. That was normal. But then the footsteps stopped, right outside her door. She held her breath. Her heart was going too fast. She counted. 1 second, 2 seconds, 5, 10. The boots didn't move. Whoever was standing out there was completely still. She could almost feel the weight of them through the door. And then, after what felt like forever, the footsteps started again, slow and unhurried, and faded away down the corridor. The kitchen was warm and familiar. She knew every crack in the walls, every sound the old stove made, every person who walked in, and what they took in their tea. She was invisible here, and she knew how to use that. She was in the middle of peeling potatoes when the kitchen door opened. She didn't look up at first. People came and went, but then the room went quiet. Not the natural kind of quiet, the kind that falls over people when something unexpected has walked in. She turned around. Alpha King Damien was standing in the kitchen doorway. He was wearing full formal dress, which meant this was not a casual visit. He was tall, with dark eyes that moved slowly across the room, the way a person scans something they already know, looking for one specific thing. The kitchen workers had all stopped what they were doing. 3 senior warriors who had been eating at the back table had straightened up without thinking. His eyes found her, and stayed there. "What is your name?" he asked. The room did not breathe. Nadia set down her knife very carefully. She wiped her hands on her apron. She did not let herself shake, even though everything in her wanted to. Then, she looked up and told him her name. She said it clearly. Nadia Cortez. Something moved across his face. It was not a big reaction. He was not the kind of man who showed big reactions. But it was there. A brief tightening, like someone who has just heard a word in a language they thought was dead. He nodded once, then he left. The kitchen stayed silent for a full 10 seconds after he was gone. Then everyone very carefully went back to what they were doing, and nobody looked at Nadia, and Nadia spent the rest of the morning with her hands in her apron pockets, so nobody could see them trembling. 2 days later, her whole life was rearranged without her permission. She was politely, but very firmly moved from her room in the East Wing to a proper guest suite in the main building. An attendant she had never met arrived at her door. Her name was quietly removed from the required kitchen rotation. Nobody explained anything. Nobody asked her how she felt about it. She was furious. She walked straight to the Alpha King's office. His aide tried to stop her at the door. She said, without raising her voice, "Tell him the woman with the Cortez name wants 5 minutes." She got the meeting. Damien was sitting at a large wooden desk when she walked in. He did not look surprised to see her. He gestured to the chair across from him and waited. She sat down and looked at him. "I would like to know what is happening," she said. "And I would like the actual answer, not a polite version of it." He looked at her for a moment. Then he said, "Your parents were not removed from this pack because they did something wrong." She went very still. He continued. He told her everything, slowly, without drama, the way you tell someone something difficult when you have decided they deserve the truth. He told her that her parents had been removed under a forced agreement, signed by her father after the previous Alpha King, Damien's own father, discovered what the Cortez bloodline carried. Her bloodline, he explained, was one of only 3 in their pack's entire recorded history that held something called an anchor bond. It was not a myth, it was not a legend, it was a real, documented thing in pack law, older than the current ruling line by 4 generations. What it meant, in simple terms, was this. If a person carrying the anchor bond came of age within the pack and was recognized by an Alpha King of the correct lineage, the bond would activate. And once it activated, that person was granted equal standing in all matters of pack law. Not romantic, not symbolic. Legally equal. Damien's father had not wanted that. He had removed the Cortez family so that Nadia, who had been just a small child at the time, would never grow up close enough to an Alpha King for the bond to recognize itself. But then Damien's father died, and Damien became the Alpha King. And on a cold Tuesday night in October, he had been walking the East Wing corridor on his nightly perimeter check, and he had stopped outside her door, because something in her presence had reached him across the stone, and the silence and the dark, like a word being spoken in a language he didn't know he understood. The bond had recognized itself. Nadia sat with that for a long time. Then she asked, "Did you know any of this before that night?" "No," he said. "Do you want this?" she asked. He was quiet, longer than she expected. Then he said, "What I want is not the point. What is true is what I have to work with." It was the most honest thing she had ever heard anyone in a position of power say out loud. She didn't trust him. Not yet, but she understood him a little. And for now, that was something. The compound did not take the news quietly. Within a week, the community was split. Half the pack accepted what Damien told them. He was not a man people argued with easily. But the old families, the ones who had been loyal to his father's way of doing things, were quietly and very deliberately pushing back. In meetings, in corridors, in whispered conversations over meals. And then someone went into her old room in the East Wing and took the journal from under the floorboard. Her mother's journal. The one she had been keeping safe for 15 years. The one that contained, in her mother's own handwriting, every detail of what had happened to their family. When Nadia reported this to Damien, she watched his face change in a way she had not seen before. His jaw tightened. His eyes went flat and very focused. She told him she had memorized most of the journal. She had read it so many times over the years that the important parts had become part of her. She wrote them out from memory, every word she could recall, including the 2 pages she suspected had been taken specifically because they referenced the sealed agreement her father had signed. She submitted that written account as formal testimony to the Pack Council. At the next formal Pack gathering, the first in 3 years, the old guard families made their move. Their spokesperson, Elder Rusk, who had sat on the Pack Council for 2 decades, stood up in front of everyone and said that Nadia was an imposter, that the bond was a fabrication, that a kitchen worker from the unranked roster had no legitimate place at any table that mattered. The room was very quiet. Nadia stood up. She did not raise her voice. She never had to. She said, "My parents were pushed out of this pack so I would never find out what I carry. Someone in this room knew that plan and supported it. And since we are all here talking about what's real, I want to know who still has my mother's journal." The silence that followed told her more than any answer could have. The journal was returned within 12 hours, anonymously. 2 pages were gone, just as she had suspected, but she had already written down what they said. Elder Rusk resigned from the council 3 days later, without explanation. Life after that was strange and slow, and not at all what Nadia had expected. She had thought that finding out the truth would feel like an ending, like something clicking into place. But it didn't feel like that at all. It felt like standing in a doorway, the old room behind her, a whole unfamiliar corridor ahead, and nothing telling her which way to go. She spent a long time thinking about what she actually wanted. Not what the bond said, not what Pack Law said. What she, Nadia Cortez, wanted for her own life. She had not asked for any of this. She had not asked for equal standing, or a seat at a table she was never invited to. She had spent 15 years being invisible, and part of her understood that invisibility well. It had kept her safe. It had kept her quiet and small and unchallenged. But it had also kept her from everything. Her mother had not chosen invisibility. It had been forced on her. And the journal, that worn, soft-paged journal that her mother had written in almost every night, ended mid-sentence on a date that matched the night everything was taken from their family. Her mother had not gotten to finish her story. Nadia decided that she was going to finish hers. She told Damien she was staying. Not because of the bond, not for him. She was staying because this was her pack, her home, her family's history. And she was done living on the edges of things that belonged to her. At the following formal gathering, Damien did something that surprised every single person in the room. He stood up and introduced Nadia, not as a partner, not as a romantic figure, but as the co-authority that Pack Law had always designated, under a rule older than his own family's time in power. He acknowledged that his father had acted against that law. He did not make speeches about it. He did not ask for applause. He just stated the facts, clearly and without apology, and formally restored the Cortez name to the official pack registry. It was not dramatic. It was not romantic. It was accurate. And it was just. And to Nadia, that meant more than any gesture ever could have. Months later, she was walking back from a late evening meeting. She had started attending the ones she found useful and skipping the ones she didn't, when she passed the entrance to the East Wing corridor. She stood at the far end and looked down its length. Her old door was shut. The floor was the same cold stone it had always been. She thought about the girl who used to sleep there. The girl who had learned to make herself small and quiet and easy to overlook. The girl who kept her mother's secrets under a floorboard and told herself that staying hidden was the same thing as staying safe. She stood there for just a moment. Then she turned around and walked back toward the lit part of the compound, toward the noise and the people, and the rooms that were now hers by law, by right, and by choice. The Alpha King's boots had stopped outside her door one cold October night. And yes, that moment had changed everything. But it was Nadia who had decided what it changed into.